Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe because in their eyes, she didn't belong there anymore. Maya Wilson sat quietly at the far end of the mess hall, a shadow in uniform. The air buzzed with the sound of laughter, boots scraping on the tile, metal trays clattering against steel tables. Yet all that noise faded into a dull hum around her. She learned to exist in silence, to shrink herself into the corners where no one bothered to look. 8 years of it. 8 long years of whispers, of stares, of being the failure who cracked in Syria. They said she panicked, that she called for extraction too early, that 3 good men died because of her. They never knew the truth. Corporal Blake Morrison's voice cut through the room like a whip. "You're the worst soldier I've ever seen," he barked, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. The insult landed like it always did, sharp, deliberate, rehearsed. Around him, his usual pack of sycophants laughed, their voices echoing off the cold walls. Maya didn't look up. She kept eating her plain meal, eyes fixed on the tray, pretending the food didn't taste like ash. At Fort Meridian, everyone knew who she was and what she was. A washed-up soldier, a disgrace who should have quit years ago. They made sure she never forgot it. For 8 years she'd endured it, the mockery, the isolation, the rumors. She never fought back, never defended herself, never explained. She let the world believe she'd failed her team, because sometimes silence was the only armor left when truth became too dangerous to speak. But there was something Maya Wilson hadn't told them, something none of them were prepared to hear. And when one man finally discovered her secret, it would shake the foundation of everything they thought they knew. The supply room at Fort Meridian buzzed with fluorescent light. Cold, sterile, unwelcoming, like most of the base. Rows of metal shelving stood tall, lined with boxes and equipment marked with yellow caution tape and military tags. Maya moved between them like a ghost, her boots making almost no sound on the concrete. She worked with a quiet rhythm, stacking crates, checking inventory, logging serial numbers. To anyone watching, she looked like just another fatigued logistics worker, another soldier counting the days until discharge. But Lieutenant Ryan Torres had been watching. He leaned against the doorway, clipboard in hand, pretending to check notes while his eyes followed her movements. Something about her didn't fit. He had seen her lift a heavy crate, one clearly labeled 2-person lift required, and place it on the top shelf as if it weighed nothing. Her motion was precise, fluid, practiced. No wasted effort, no grunt, no tremor. The kind of efficiency that came from muscle memory built over years of training. And yet, the moment she noticed him, everything changed. Her posture slumped slightly, her movements turned awkward, forced. She wiped imaginary sweat from her brow. All that gym time finally paying off, she joked with a nervous laugh. But Ryan wasn't laughing. His instincts, honed from years in military intelligence, told him this woman was performing, pretending. He didn't know why, not yet, but something about Maya Wilson didn't add up. At lunch, the cafeteria roared like a battlefield. Trays clattered, conversations merged into an indistinct storm of voices, and the smell of overcooked stew filled the air. Maya sat alone, as always, in the corner, back against the wall facing the exits. She didn't even realize she was doing it anymore. The way her eyes flicked toward every new arrival, the subtle adjustment of her shoulders whenever someone got too close. Hyper-awareness, habitual readiness. To most, it looked like anxiety. To Ryan Torres, it looked like combat conditioning. Blake Morrison's voice sliced through the noise again. "Let's see what the failure's eating today." Laughter followed, not the kind that comes from humor, but the kind people use to hide their discomfort. Soldiers turned to watch as Blake and his crew approached Maya's table. He stood over her, shadow long and heavy. "Heard you couldn't even carry ammo for your squad in Syria," he said, voice rising just enough to draw a crowd. "Got 3 good men killed, didn't you?" The words hit hard, not because they were true, but because Maya had no way to fight them without revealing everything she'd buried. Her jaw tightened, her hands trembled as she reached for her cup. Then Blake accidentally knocked over her water. It spilled across the tray, soaking her bread, dripping onto her uniform. The cafeteria went silent for a heartbeat. Maya simply nodded, wiped the mess, and kept cleaning, mechanical, expressionless. But Ryan noticed her knuckles white, straining against the napkin. The kind of restraint that comes from someone holding back something much stronger than anger. That night, she stayed behind in the kitchen area, washing dishes alone under the buzz of flickering lights. The sleeves of her utility shirt were rolled to her elbows, revealing forearms stronger than anyone expected from someone stuck in admin work. As she reached for a dish on the top shelf, her sleeve slipped back slightly, revealing the edge of a tattoo. Ryan, who had walked in quietly, froze mid-step. It wasn't just any tattoo. The lines were too clean, the design too deliberate: wings, stars, geometric precision. Military but not standard issue. Something else, something deeper. "That's an interesting tattoo," he said finally, pretending to sound casual. "Looks official." Maya's reaction was instant. She tugged her sleeve down. "Just something stupid from when I was young," she said, smiling in that polite, deflecting way that told him never to ask again. But Ryan wasn't buying it. He'd seen military-grade tattoos, unit markings, special operations insignia, covert task symbols. Her ink looked like something he'd glimpsed once in a classified briefing, something from a file marked top secret/eyes only. The kind of insignia that wasn't supposed to exist. That night he couldn't sleep. Every detail about her started replaying in his mind: her reflexes, her discipline, her silence. It all fit a pattern he couldn't explain. Who exactly was Maya Wilson? The next morning, the base motor pool was alive with the sounds of engines and metal. Maya had been assigned to inventory, another menial task meant to keep her out of sight. A maintenance cart loaded with heavy engine parts suddenly rolled down an incline, heading straight toward a group of mechanics who hadn't noticed. In that split second, Maya moved. Not just ran, moved. She sprinted across the floor, faster than anyone could react, and shoved two soldiers clear a moment before the cart smashed into a concrete wall. Silence. The men she saved looked at her, stunned. The washed-up soldier who supposedly froze under pressure had just reacted with perfect precision and flawless control. Blake Morrison, watching from across the bay, saw it too. His smirk faltered. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. "How did you move that fast?" he demanded later, cornering her near the tool racks. "Just lucky reflexes, I guess," Maya replied softly, but her eyes said something else. Something she didn't want him to see. That night in the women's bathroom, she stared at her reflection under the harsh fluorescent light. She splashed cold water on her face, trying to breathe. Outside, voices drifted through the thin door, two soldiers gossiping about her again. "Wilson called for extraction too early. That's why her team died. My cousin said she was found hiding while her squad bled out." The words pierced deeper than any bullet. Her fingers gripped the sink until her knuckles went white. Tears welled, rare, restrained, unwanted. "They don't know," she whispered to the mirror. "They can't know." But even as she said it, a darker thought crept in, one that haunted her every night for 8 years. What if they were right? Across the base, Ryan Torres sat in his dimly lit quarters, the glow of his computer reflecting off his eyes. He was digging where he shouldn't. Maya Wilson personnel file. Most of it was redacted, pages of black lines. A medical discharge citing psychological trauma during active combat in Syria. But the deeper he tried to go, the stranger it became. Her file had been updated recently. Someone with high-level clearance was maintaining it, adjusting it, protecting it. The system flashed a red warning: unauthorized access detected. Ryan pulled back, heart pounding, but the truth was already forming in his mind. Maya Wilson wasn't just some disgraced soldier. She was someone important, someone erased, and someone very dangerous. 2 days later, everything changed. The warehouse, an isolated maze of shelves and metal crates, was empty except for Blake Morrison and 4 of his loyal followers. He told Maya she was needed for inventory. She came, as always, quietly, obediently. It was a trap. They surrounded her, laughing, mocking, throwing small parts at her, tipping boxes, undoing her work. Filming it all, their plan was to humiliate her completely. But something in Maya's eyes had changed. She was done pretending. Blake stepped closer, voice dripping with venom. "Show us how you saved your team in Syria," he jeered, then sneered. "Oh, wait, you didn't." The words tore through her like shrapnel. Her hands shook, not with fear, but with years of suppressed fury. When he shoved her hard into a metal rack, something inside her snapped. The shelving tilted, hundreds of pounds of metal beginning to fall straight toward Blake. And then instinct. Maya moved. In one impossible motion, she caught the rack, braced herself, and stopped it mid-fall. Her muscles locked, veins standing out on her arms, face tight with effort, but she held it. Alone. For a moment, time froze. Everyone stared, no one spoke. Because in that instant, they all realized the failure wasn't weak. She wasn't scared. She was hiding something far bigger than any of them could imagine. Far down the hallway, heavy boots echoed against the concrete floor. General Samuel Cross, 55 years old, sharp-eyed, calm, and uncompromising, was heading toward the warehouse after hearing reports of commotion. When he stepped inside and saw the scene before him, the mess, the fear, Maya's silent defiance, he stopped cold. And then he saw it. Her sleeve had torn in the chaos, revealing the tattoo fully for the first time. A phoenix, wings outstretched, surrounded by 9 small stars. The color drained from his face. "Operation Black Phoenix," he whispered. "That's impossible." The air shifted. Every soldier in the room felt it, the weight of something bigger than rank or rumor. The general's voice cut through the silence. "Everyone out now." His tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried command and fear. When the others were gone, Maya stood at attention. Her old posture returned, straight and perfect, years of muscle memory snapping back into place. The general studied her for a long time, his jaw tightening. "Operative Phoenix," he said quietly. His voice trembled. "How are you alive?" The silence inside the warehouse was thick enough to hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Dust floated in the air, glowing faintly in the narrow beams of sunlight filtering through high windows. Maya stood still, her chest rising and falling, eyes fixed straight ahead. The mask she'd worn for 8 years, the quiet, broken soldier, was gone. What replaced it was something sharper, something disciplined, dangerous, alive. General Samuel Cross studied her like a man seeing a ghost. The symbol inked into her skin wasn't just a tattoo. It was a signature, one that had been wiped from every official record 8 years ago. Operation Black Phoenix. The program was so classified that most generals weren't even aware it had existed. Cross had overseen it personally, a mission that had ended in blood, betrayal, and silence. He had attended the funerals, read the reports, and watched the cover story take shape. According to every file, every statement, every political necessity, everyone from that unit had died. And yet here she was, alive, standing before him. He took a slow step forward, his boots scraping against the concrete. "How are you alive?" he asked quietly, not as an accusation but as a plea. Maya didn't answer right away. She swallowed hard, her eyes flicking briefly toward the floor. Years of practiced humility fought with instincts she'd buried deep. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the tone of someone who had stopped pretending. "Permission to speak freely, sir," General Cross gave a single nod. Maya straightened her back, lifted her chin, and spoke the truth she'd carried alone for nearly a decade. Operation Black Phoenix, Syria, 2016. Even saying the words felt dangerous. Her voice was steady, deliberate, the cadence of a soldier reporting, not confessing. 9 of us were sent to extract Ambassador Richard Harrison. Terror Cell had him, deep inside non-permitted territory. We were supposed to go in clean, quiet, invisible. Cross's jaw tightened. He remembered that mission, at least the version that had made it into the debriefings. Hostage killed in failed extraction. Team lost under hostile fire. Operative Maya Wilson declared KIA. He had never questioned it until now. Maya's eyes met his. "We got him out," she said simply. "Alive." The words hit him like a blow. She continued, her voice flattening into the rhythm of a soldier reliving a nightmare. "We took down the entire compound. 2 hostiles on the east gate, 1 sniper on overwatch. We breached from the north side under heavy fire. We lost 3 men before Harrison was secured, but we got him to the border. We did our job." Her breath caught, and then the extraction bird went down. The warehouse seemed to shrink with every word. Cross listened in silence as Maya spoke of smoke and sand, of the chaos that had followed. The diplomatic rescue had turned into an international incident, one that could never be acknowledged. The U.S. couldn't admit they'd operated on unauthorized soil. The price of exposure would have been political war. "They told me to disappear," Maya said, her voice shaking for the first time. "Said the mission didn't exist. Said my team didn't exist. They needed a scapegoat to make the paperwork clean." Cross exhaled slowly, guilt flickering in his eyes. "You took the blame." "I took the silence," she corrected, "so their families could live with pride, so those men would be remembered as heroes, not criminals." For the first time in years, General Cross, the man who had signed more commendations than he could count, had no words. He looked at the woman standing before him, this soldier who had chosen disgrace over dishonor, who had carried the burden of national secrecy while her name was dragged through the mud. "What they did to you," he murmured. Maya shook her head. "What I agreed to," she said. "It was my choice, sir." And that was the truth. She had signed it herself, the false report, the confession that painted her as a coward. She'd done it willingly to protect the operation and the families of the fallen. But the cost had been 8 years of exile. 8 years of whispers and humiliation. 8 years of pretending to be broken. Unseen behind the stacked crates near the far wall, someone was listening. Blake Morrison. He hadn't followed orders to leave. He had stayed hidden, heart-pounding, as he watched the scene unfold, his entire understanding of Maya Wilson collapsing before his eyes. Every cruel joke, every insult, every humiliation he'd thrown at her suddenly curdled into shame. The woman he'd tormented had been protecting secrets bigger than the entire base. And he'd treated her like trash. He pressed a trembling hand against the cold metal shelf to steady himself. He couldn't stop hearing her words. "I chose disgrace to protect the families." Outside the warehouse, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. The sun dipped lower over Fort Meridian, casting long shadows across the asphalt. But inside, something irreversible had shifted. Maya stood silent as General Cross studied her again. The phoenix tattoo, black ink with faint crimson highlights, seemed to burn under the harsh lights. "That emblem," he said softly, "it was supposed to be destroyed, every record scrubbed." "It's the only thing I kept," she replied, "the only proof that it happened." Cross hesitated. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Do you know how many people would kill to know that program still existed?" "I know, sir." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then you also know what happens to people who talk about it." Maya's gaze didn't waver. "I haven't talked," she said, "for 8 years." He nodded slowly. "And now I understand why you survived." You weren't hiding from fear, you were protecting something sacred. She didn't respond, because deep down she didn't feel like a hero. She just felt tired. The next morning, Fort Meridian woke to an unusual order. Every soldier, from the greenest recruit to the most senior sergeant, was called to assembly. The parade ground stretched wide under a gray sky, the air crisp with early morning cold. Hundreds of soldiers stood in formation, boots aligned, chatter low and confused. Rumors had already spread that someone had been caught spying, or that an officer was under investigation. No one suspected what was about to happen. Maya stood at the front, her uniform pressed, her expression unreadable. For once, her posture was straight, not the timid stance of someone shrinking from the world, but the composed stillness of a soldier who had remembered who she was. General Cross took the podium, his face pale but resolute. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 decades of command. 8 years ago, he began, this unit failed one of its own. A ripple passed through the crowd, confusion, curiosity, unease. Today, Cross continued, we correct that mistake. He turned toward Maya, gesturing for her to step forward. Sergeant Maya Wilson stands before you not as the failure you've been told she is, but as one of the most decorated soldiers to ever serve this country. The air cracked with silence. Ryan Torres, standing in the second row, felt his throat tighten. Blake Morrison, near the back, stared at the ground, unable to lift his head. General Cross opened a folder, his voice ringing out across the formation. For extraordinary heroism in combat operations, Silver Star. For wounds received in action, Purple Heart. For direct engagement under fire, Combat Action Badge. And for actions that remain classified but saved countless American lives, Medal of Honor, Sealed Record. Gasps rippled through the ranks. The woman they had mocked for years, the one they'd called weak, broken, a disgrace, had been a hero all along. Cross's voice softened, but carried even more power. Sergeant Wilson extracted an American diplomat from hostile territory under conditions that would have broken lesser soldiers. She completed her mission against impossible odds and paid for it with 8 years of silence. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. We told her story wrong, and that is on us. Then came the reckoning. Private Blake Morrison, front and center. Blake froze. The crowd parted as he stepped forward, the weight of 300 stares pressing against him. General Cross's tone turned to steel. Private Morrison has spent months harassing, degrading, and humiliating a decorated war hero. His behavior is a stain on this unit and on the uniform he wears. The silence was suffocating. Cross continued, voice unwavering. Effective immediately, reduction to the lowest enlisted rank, 30 days confinement to quarters, administrative separation from the United States Army. Blake's world tilted, his throat burned, his palms shook. But the worst came next. Before you leave this ground, the general said, you will apologize to Sergeant Wilson. Blake turned toward her, the woman he'd spent years tormenting. Her eyes were calm, steady, unreadable. I'm sorry, he managed, his voice cracking. I was wrong about everything. Maya stepped forward. Her voice was clear, measured, almost gentle. I forgive you, Private Morrison. The crowd stirred, whispers passing like wind through tall grass. Hatred only creates more pain, she said softly, and there's been enough pain already. Applause started slowly, one pair of hands, then another, until the entire formation erupted. Not because they were told to, but because they needed to. For the first time in 8 years, Maya Wilson stood not as a ghost, but as a soldier reborn. Later that night, long after the formation had ended and the base had gone quiet, Maya sat alone in the dim light of her quarters. The uniform she'd worn that morning hung neatly on the chair beside her, crisp, restored, whole. Her fingers traced the edge of the phoenix tattoo. For years it had been a mark of loss. Now it was something else, a reminder that rebirth doesn't always mean glory. Sometimes it just means surviving long enough to be seen. Outside, the wind whispered across the base, carrying away the echoes of everything that had been said, everything that had been buried, everything that had finally come into the light. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Maya allowed herself to breathe. But she didn't know that this was only the beginning. Because redemption was never the end of a story, it was just the moment when a new one began. The office of General Samuel Cross was the quietest room on Fort Meridian. Every sound in it felt deliberate, the low hum of the desk lamp, the faint rattle of metals hanging on the wall, the distant echo of boots in the corridor. Maya sat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, posture straight but calm. For the first time in years, she wasn't hiding behind slumped shoulders or half-spoken words. The air between them carried something heavier than tension, respect, and a shared understanding of the cost of silence. General Cross leaned back in his chair, studying her the way a man might look at a map he'd once known by heart, but hadn't seen in years. "So," he said finally, voice measured, "you could have come forward at any time, you could have cleared your name. Why wait 8 years?" Maya's gaze lowered briefly, because the lie protected more than the truth would have healed. Cross nodded slowly. The answer wasn't new to him, but hearing it from her in person gave it weight. He reached for the folder sitting on the edge of his desk. It was thick, heavy, sealed with red tape marked classified. "Your record," he said, tapping it. "The official one will be corrected. Effective immediately, you are reinstated to the rank of sergeant. Full honors, back pay, commendations, all of it returned." He hesitated, "And there's more." Maya said nothing, waiting. Cross opened the folder again, flipping through documents stamped with approval codes she didn't recognize. "I've been asked to recommend a leader for a new special operations initiative. The kind that doesn't make the news. You'd have full autonomy, hand-picked team, unlimited resources." He looked up. "They want you, Wilson. You'd be back in the field, this time with the recognition you deserve." The words should have thrilled her. Once they would have. But something in her expression softened, not with excitement, but with quiet sorrow. "Sir," she began carefully, "with respect, I don't think I'm the soldier they're looking for anymore." Cross frowned. "You've earned this." "I've earned peace," she said, "and maybe a chance to give others what I didn't have." Her voice wavered, but not from weakness, from conviction. "For 8 years I was the ghost in the room," she continued. "The soldier everyone whispered about but no one helped. There are more like me, sir. Men and women who came back from classified missions they can't talk about, who carry trauma they can't share. They can't go to therapy. They can't even tell their families. They just break quietly like I did." Cross's jaw tightened. "You're talking about Black Ops veterans." "I'm talking about people," Maya said. "People who gave everything and then had to live as though they'd done nothing." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock. Cross looked down at her file again, at the long list of commendations, the sealed citations, the evidence of what she had been and what she'd lost. "What are you planning, Sergeant?" "I want to start something," she said softly. "A place for them to come, to heal, to talk without having to break the oaths they took." Cross's eyes narrowed slightly. "You'd be walking a fine line with classified material." "I've lived on that line for 8 years, Maya replied. "I know how not to cross it." He studied her face for a moment longer, then gave a slow nod. "You really mean it?" "I do." Cross leaned back again, exhaling heavily. "When I was your age, all I wanted was medals, promotions, titles. You're asking for none of it. Why?" Maya looked out the window, where the sun was rising over the base. "Because medals fade, sir, but the damage that lasts, and maybe it's time someone started repairing it." For the first time that morning, a faint smile touched the general's face, a mix of admiration and melancholy. "You know, Wilson, I've spent 32 years building soldiers. Maybe it's time someone built something for them instead. Outside, the day broke in soft gold light. The base was slowly returning to normal, though nothing about it felt normal anymore. Word of the morning's assembly had spread like wildfire. Soldiers who once turned away from Maya now nodded respectfully when she passed. Some avoided her out of shame. Others watched her with quiet awe. But she didn't linger on any of it. The attention made her uneasy. Hero, failure. Neither label had ever fit her right. She wanted something quieter, truer. She wanted purpose. Later that afternoon, Ryan Torres caught up with her near the motor pool. He looked uneasy, guilt etched in his face. "Sergeant Wilson," he said, falling into step beside her. She turned, half smiling. "Ryan." He hesitated before speaking. "I owe you an apology too. I dug into your file I shouldn't have." "You were trying to understand," she said gently. "That's not something I'm angry about." He nodded, relieved but still restless. "When I saw the redacted files, the security blocks, I knew you weren't who everyone said you were, but I didn't know what to do with that." Maya stopped walking. "You did the right thing, you looked closer." Ryan exhaled. "If it's any comfort, I think most of the base learned something yesterday about what silence really costs." Her eyes softened. "It costs everything, Lieutenant." He hesitated again, then asked, "What happens now?" Maya looked toward the horizon where the mountains carved dark shapes against the afternoon light. "Now," she said quietly, "now I start over." That evening the barracks felt strange, like the quiet after a storm. Soldiers moved through the hallways in subdued silence, their conversations hushed. The word had spread through every corner of Fort Meridian. Maya Wilson, the washed-up soldier, was a hero. But behind the whispers and the guilt, something new had taken root: respect. Even Blake Morrison, confined to quarters under guard, couldn't escape the sound of it. He sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the wall, trying to process what he'd heard in the warehouse. Maya's voice, the things she'd said, they played on loop in his mind. "I chose disgrace to protect the families." He had spent years tearing her down, and in return, she had saved his life when that rack started to fall. The shame was unbearable. For the first time in his life, Blake Morrison, the bully, the loudmouth, the self-proclaimed leader, felt small. Back in her quarters, Maya packed a small duffel, not because she was leaving the base, but because she was shedding the last weight of her old life. She folded her fatigues carefully, placing them alongside her notebook. A small, leather-bound journal filled with handwritten names, numbers, fragments of ideas. The title scrawled across the first page read, "The Phoenix Center." It wasn't official yet, not even close. Just a thought, but it was enough. Each name she'd written belonged to someone she'd served with, or someone she'd heard about through quiet channels, soldiers broken by the burden of secrets, by classified missions that erased their existence. People who couldn't heal because their wounds had no language. She planned to give them one. 2 weeks later, she found herself back in General Cross's office. This time he wasn't behind his desk. He stood by the window, holding a mug of coffee, watching the rain streak across the glass. "Your paperwork's processed," he said. "You're officially reinstated." Maya nodded, offering a faint smile. "Thank you, sir." He turned to face her. "But I can tell that's not what you came for." "No, sir." He gestured to the chair. "Sit." She did, then slid a folder across the desk toward him. Inside were blueprints, proposals, handwritten notes. He flipped through them silently. The words Veteran Support Network, a Phoenix Initiative, appeared at the top of the page. "You're serious about this?" he murmured. "I am." Cross closed the folder and leaned forward. "You're asking for funding, personnel, a building off base, and clearance protocols for classified veterans. That's ambitious." "It's necessary." He studied her for a long moment. "You think one woman can fix a system that's been broken for decades?" Maya met his gaze evenly. "No, sir, but one woman can start." Cross's expression softened. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "My wife," he said with a small, wistful smile. "She used to say the same thing before she opened the first rehabilitation home for combat amputees in this state. People told her it was impossible too." "What happened?" "She proved them wrong." A faint smile crossed Maya's face. "Then maybe I will too." Cross chuckled quietly. "You know, Sergeant, most people would have taken the promotion. You're walking away from power, from glory. Why?" Maya's answer came easily. "Because I've already seen what glory costs." That night, Maya walked the perimeter of Fort Meridian one last time. The air smelled of rain and oil and earth. Lights flickered from the barracks windows, glowing softly in the fog. This place had been her cage and her crucible. She stopped near the motor pool where the cart had nearly killed those soldiers weeks ago. The same concrete, the same oil stains, but something felt different now. She wasn't hiding anymore. For 8 years she had pretended to be broken so no one would ask what she was protecting. Now the truth was out, and the weight was gone. Still a quiet ache lingered, the kind that comes not from wounds but from absence. The team she'd lost, the lives she couldn't save. She pressed her hand over the tattoo beneath her sleeve, the phoenix and its 9 stars. "You're still with me," she whispered. And for the first time, the words didn't hurt. In another building across the base, Ryan Torres sat at his desk, staring at an open file marked Personnel Culture and Conduct Reform. He was drafting a report, a bold one, calling for reforms in how the military handled internal harassment and classified trauma cases. Maya's story had changed him. He couldn't undo the years of silence that had buried her, but he could ensure no one else went through it again. He typed the title of his proposal, the Transparency Initiative. At the bottom, he added a line in small text, a personal dedication. For Sergeant Maya Wilson, who chose silence so others could speak. As the clock neared midnight, Maya sat at her desk, staring out at the darkened base. Papers were scattered across the table, designs, names, plans. Her mind was tired, but her spirit was steady. She wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead. She didn't know if anyone would fund her vision, or if the world would even care. But she knew this, for the first time in years, she had something worth fighting for again. Not orders, not missions. Healing. And maybe forgiveness. The kind that doesn't need medals or headlines. Just courage quiet enough to keep going when no one's watching. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Maya whispered to the empty room, not a prayer, not a vow, but something simpler. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The snow had started to fall over Colorado Springs, soft flakes drifting through the cold air, as if the world itself were exhaling. The base lights glowed faintly beneath the haze, casting long, blurred halos that turned Fort Meridian into something gentler than it deserved to be. Maya Wilson stood outside the gates, her duffel slung over one shoulder, her orders tucked neatly into her jacket. For 8 years, she had walked these same grounds as a ghost. Now, she was leaving them behind as something entirely different, not a soldier, not an outcast, but something reborn. Still, she didn't look back. She knew if she did, she might not leave at all. The drive into town was quiet. A 2-hour stretch of empty road, gray mountains in the distance, and static whispering through the radio. It gave her too much time to think about the men she'd lost, the lies she'd lived, and the fragile sense of peace she was trying to build. On the passenger seat sat a single folder. The words printed across its cover read, "The Phoenix Center Preliminary Proposal." Inside were blueprints, names, projected budgets, but what filled most of the pages were handwritten notes in the margins. Thoughts she couldn't stop writing. Phrases like truth without exposure and healing without headlines. To anyone else, it was just a plan. To her, it was a lifeline. The old office building she'd found sat on the outskirts of town, forgotten, cheap, and perfect. Its sign was faded, its windows dusty, but Maya saw what it could be. She stepped through the cracked glass door, her boots echoing across the bare floor. The air smelled like dust and stale paint. Light poured through the blinds in sharp lines that cut through the emptiness. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She dropped her bag, took a slow breath, and whispered to no one, "Welcome to the Phoenix Center." The words felt strange in the air, almost sacred. A week later, the first person to show up wasn't a client. It was Ryan Torres. He stood in the doorway, holding 2 paper cups of coffee, his expression uncertain. "You weren't exactly easy to find," he said. Maya smiled faintly. "That's kind of the point." He stepped inside, looking around at the half-empty room. "You're really doing this?" "I am." Ryan set one of the coffees on the desk she'd salvaged from a surplus store. "You could have taken that special ops offer. You'd be back in uniform, leading missions again." "I've led enough missions," Maya said softly. "This is one worth finishing." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then let me help." She blinked. "Help you have a career, a future in command." "Maybe," he said, "but I've also got a conscience that won't shut up." He hesitated, then added, "I'm starting something too, a transparency initiative, internal oversight for how we handle classified trauma cases." Her brow lifted. "Ryan." He gave a small shrug. "If the system buried you once, it can bury others too. Maybe I can stop that." For the first time, Maya's guarded expression softened into something close to gratitude. "Then I guess we're both rebuilding," she said. "From the ashes," he replied. The first few months were slow. Maya rented folding chairs from a community center. She scrubbed floors, patched cracks, and painted the walls herself. She learned how to stretch every dollar of her pension. But the hardest part wasn't the work, it was the waiting. She had built this place for soldiers who couldn't speak, veterans bound by classified contracts, silenced by secrecy, haunted by what they couldn't admit. But how do you reach the invisible? The first time her phone rang, it startled her. The voice on the other end was hesitant, quiet male. "Is this Sergeant Wilson?" "Yes," she said. "You don't know me, but I served in something similar. Afghanistan, 2014. They said we were never there." Maya's throat tightened. "You can come here," she said gently. "You don't have to tell me what happened, just come." He hesitated. "You won't report it?" "No," she said softly, "not unless you want me to." There was silence, then a quiet exhale of relief. "Okay." And just like that, the Phoenix Center had its first client. Within months, there were more. A Marine who hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night since an off-the-record mission in South Sudan. A CIA operative whose entire career had been erased from existence. An Air Force pilot who'd been forced to fake his own failure after a classified interception that saved hundreds. They came one by one, broken, wary, silent. Maya never asked for details. She didn't need them. "I don't need to know what happened," she would tell them, "only how it feels." And somehow that was enough. For the first time, people began to speak without breaking their oaths. They spoke of loneliness, guilt, loss, not in code, not in jargon, but in human words. Maya listened. That was her weapon now, empathy sharper than any rifle, patience steadier than any sniper scope. And slowly healing began. Word spread quietly, whispered through veteran circles, private forums, and underground networks that handled the unacknowledged. The government couldn't officially endorse her program, but even in silence, support trickled in grants under vague titles, quiet visits from uniformed officers who never left names. General Cross came once. He stood in the doorway of her small office, watching as a group of veterans sat in a circle, talking softly, laughing even. When the session ended, he approached her. "You did it," he said. Maya smiled faintly. Not yet, but we're getting there. He looked around the room, then back at her. You know they'll study this one day. Your methods, your results. I don't want to be studied, she said. I just want them to live. Cross nodded. That's exactly why it's working. Before he left, he said something she would never forget. You saved them twice, Wilson. Once in combat and now in peace. One night long after the last light had been turned off, Maya stayed behind. The quiet in the center was different from the quiet of the base, softer, warmer, alive. She sat at her desk, flipping through the intake forms of the people she'd helped. Every name, every scar, every small victory. For the first time in years, she felt something like pride, not in the soldier she'd been, but in the woman she'd become. But even as she sat there, the past wasn't done with her. Blake Morrison showed up 6 months later. He looked nothing like the arrogant corporal she remembered. His uniform was gone, replaced by a plain jacket and eyes that looked 10 years older. Maya saw him through the glass door before he entered. The hesitation in his stance told her this visit wasn't impulsive. It had taken him months of shame and self-confrontation to get here. He stepped inside, clutching his cap nervously. "Sergeant Wilson," he began. "Just Maya," she said quietly. He swallowed hard. I don't really know how to start this." "Then start with the truth," she said. He nodded, took a deep breath and began to speak. "I've spent months trying to figure out why I did what I did, why I hated you so much, why I needed someone to look smaller than me to feel big. I told myself it was culture, banter, but it was weakness." His voice cracked. "You were everything I wanted to be, respected, strong, but they told me you were a failure, so I believed it. It made me feel better about who I was." Maya said nothing, letting the silence do its work. Finally, he met her gaze. "I'm not asking you to forgive me again. I just needed you to know I'm trying to change. I'm working at a veterans hospital now, volunteering, trying to help." Maya studied him for a long moment, not as the man who'd tormented her, but as one who'd finally seen himself clearly. "You already are," she said softly. Blake blinked. "What?" "You're helping," she said. "That's the hardest step." He exhaled shakily. "It's a start." "It's more than that," she replied. "It's redemption." Blake's eyes glistened. "You really believe that?" Maya gave a small smile. "I have to. If I didn't, none of this would exist." After he left, Maya sat in the empty counseling room. The chairs were still arranged in a circle, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. She thought about the long path that had led her here, from a dusty base in Syria to a forgotten storage room in Colorado Springs. She thought about Blake's words, about the fragile nature of forgiveness, and about how many people were still out there, unseen, unheard, carrying invisible wars inside them. And she realized something she hadn't before. Her work wasn't about fixing the broken. It was about reminding them they weren't broken at all. Just human. Just alive. Just unfinished. Weeks turned into months. The Phoenix Center grew quietly. New staff joined, veterans, psychologists, volunteers. Ryan Torres split his time between the base and the center, his transparency initiative gaining traction in Washington. Policy changes were being discussed, funding proposals drafted. The military was finally beginning to acknowledge what had been ignored for decades, that classified service didn't erase the cost of human trauma. And it had all started with one woman who refused to stay silent. One evening, Maya stepped outside after a long session. The sun was setting behind the mountains, the sky painted in deep oranges and fading violets. She watched as the last light reflected off the glass door, the words "The Phoenix Center" gleaming faintly against the dark. A quiet voice inside her said something she hadn't heard in years. "You did it." She smiled. But another voice followed, softer, wiser, the voice of the soldier who had once chosen silence over glory. No, we did it. She thought of her fallen teammates, of Cross, of Ryan, of Blake, of the dozens of faces that now found hope where despair used to live. Every one of them was a spark in the ashes, and together they were the fire. As night fell over Colorado, Maya turned off the lights, locking up the small building that had become her purpose. The wind carried a chill through the empty parking lot. She paused for a moment, looking at the darkened windows, and whispered, "Rise again." Then she walked away, her figure fading into the night, quiet, steady, and free. The Phoenix Center didn't have the shine of a government building. Its walls were painted by hand, its furniture mismatched from donations, and its hallway smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Yet every morning, when sunlight streamed through the blinds and scattered across the scuffed tile floors, the place felt alive, more alive than any base Maya Wilson had ever served on. She arrived early, as she always did. The cold air bit at her cheeks when she unlocked the front door. Inside, the quiet greeted her like an old friend. She liked those first few minutes of stillness, before voices filled the halls, before the stories and the tears and the laughter. It was the only time she allowed herself to remember Syria. 8 faces, 8 friends, 8 ghosts that still followed her into every sunrise. She set down her bag and walked the corridor slowly, touching the frames on the wall, photographs of the veterans who had come through her doors. None of them posed for glory. They were snapshots of moments in between. Someone smiling mid-sentence, someone listening, someone daring to hope again. "Morning, boss," came a voice behind her. Ryan Torres stepped into the light, holding 2 coffees. His uniform was gone. He'd traded it for a flannel shirt and jeans. But the precision in his movements was still unmistakable. "You really should stop calling me that," Maya said, taking the cup. "Can't, you're still running point." She smirked. "Old habits die hard." "So do soldiers," he said softly. The quiet stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just real. They'd both seen too much to fill silence with noise. "How's the transparency project?" she asked. Ryan blew on his coffee. "Still alive. Washington's slow, but the fact they're even listening is something." Maya nodded. "They'll listen eventually." He studied her face for a moment. "You still don't sleep much, do you?" "Comes and goes." "Nightmares." "Memories," she corrected. Then, after a pause, "They're different now. Less about dying, more about what I'm supposed to do next." Ryan smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what healing looks like." By mid-morning, the center was full. Veterans gathered in the main room, 12 of them today, seated in a circle of worn chairs. The heater hummed softly against the winter chill. Maya sat with them, not above them, her sleeves rolled up, her hands open. "Let's start where we left off," she said. "Anyone want to share what's been hardest this week?" A woman in her 40s, former Air Force, spoke first. "Sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I hear engines. I smell fuel." Maya nodded slowly. "You were a pilot." "Yes, but that's not what wakes me up. It's the sound right before impact." The room was quiet. No one judged. No one flinched. Maya leaned forward. "You don't have to tell me the mission," she said gently. "Just tell me what it feels like when you wake up." The woman hesitated, then whispered, "Like I failed them all over again." Maya's voice softened. "You didn't fail them, you survived. And now you're here helping others survive too. That matters." Across the circle, someone murmured, "She's right." Heads nodded. Shoulders relaxed. The tension in the room eased a little, the invisible battlefield quieting for a while. Maya watched the exchange, her heart full and heavy at the same time. Every session was like this, small victories stitched into larger scars. When the meeting ended, one of the younger veterans lingered. A Marine barely 30. His hands trembled as he approached. "Ma'am, I think I know you," he said. She frowned slightly. "I don't think we've met." "No, not personally. But my uncle served under Operation Black Phoenix." Maya froze. He used to talk about his said she was the toughest, calmest person he'd ever seen, said if she'd made it out, he'd still be alive. The young man's voice cracked. I just wanted to say thank you. Maya swallowed hard. What was his name? Staff Sergeant Eric Monroe. The name hit her like a heartbeat from the past. She saw his face again, the night sky over Syria, the way he'd smiled when the extraction bird appeared, the gunfire, the explosion. She steadied herself. Your uncle was brave, she said quietly. He saved lives that night. The Marine nodded, eyes shining. So did you. When he left, Maya sat back in her chair and let the silence wash over her. For years, she'd carried guilt like armor. But in that moment, something loosened inside her, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been gripping. Maybe forgiveness didn't come all at once. Maybe it arrived in pieces, like sunlight through broken glass. Later that week, General Cross visited again. He'd retired a month earlier, but he still wore the posture of command, straight back, eyes sharp. Yet when he stepped into the center, he seemed lighter. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "Never, sir." He looked around at the small crowd gathered in the hallway. "You've built something remarkable here." Maya smiled faintly, still building. He handed her a folder. Congressional subcommittees requesting testimony on classified trauma programs. They want you to speak. Maya raised an eyebrow, publicly. Behind closed doors, but yes, it's time. She hesitated. You sure they're ready for that? Cross gave a small grin. I think the question is, are you? Maya looked down at the folder in her hands. 8 years ago, she couldn't even say the name of her mission. Now they wanted her to testify about it. She took a deep breath. I'll do it. Cross nodded approvingly. Good, and for what it's worth, Wilson, I'm proud of you. She smiled softly. Thank you, sir, but it's not about pride anymore. What is it about then? She thought for a long moment. Closure. The hearing took place 2 weeks later in a secure building in D.C. The room was windowless, lined with officials who spoke in careful tones and wrote in quiet shorthand. Maya wore a simple black suit, no ribbons, no insignia, just herself. They asked about mental health, about secrecy, about soldiers who vanished from the records. Maya answered every question carefully, never revealing names, never crossing the classified line. But when one senator asked, "Why did you choose silence for so long?" she paused. The air seemed to hold its breath. Because sometimes, she said slowly, telling the truth can destroy people who don't deserve to be destroyed. And sometimes silence is the only way to protect them. But silence should never mean abandonment. That's why we built the Phoenix Center, so no one would have to suffer alone in the name of secrecy again. The room went still. Pens stopped moving. When the hearing adjourned, one of the aides approached her quietly. Ma'am, I think you just changed policy. Maya smiled faintly. I'm not trying to change policy, she said, just lives. Months passed. The Phoenix Center grew faster than anyone expected. Other bases reached out. Other countries called. There were requests to replicate her model, to teach, to train, to expand. She refused most interviews. She didn't want cameras or headlines. She wanted results. Yet her story spread anyway. Veterans told it to each other like a secret prayer. The woman who carried everyone's silence until it broke. Blake Morrison returned one spring morning, carrying a box of files. He started a small nonprofit called Second Chances, a program for former abusers and bullies in the military who wanted to make amends through service. He looked older, steadier. Thought you might know someone who could use these, he said, setting the box on her desk. Maya glanced through the papers, counseling forms, training outlines, outreach logs. You're doing good work, Blake. He shrugged. Trying to, feels like penance most days. Maybe that's what redemption looks like, repetition until it becomes habit. He smiled faintly. You still forgive too easily. She met his eyes. No, I just learned that holding anger is heavier than any rucksack. Blake chuckled softly. Still teaching lessons, huh? Always. When he left, Maya watched him through the window, the sunlight catching the scar on his cheek, a reminder of both the man he'd been and the one he was becoming. That night, Ryan found her sitting outside the center, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson. "You ever stop?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Stopping feels strange," she said. "You could retire, travel, live for yourself for once." She smiled. "This is living." He studied her profile, the calm strength etched into it. "You ever think about them? Your team?" "Every day." "What do you think they'd say if they saw this place?" Maya looked toward the horizon. "They'd probably laugh. Tell me I finally learned how to win a war without firing a shot." Ryan smiled. "Maybe you did." The two of them sat in silence as the last light faded, replaced by the soft glow of the center's sign. The Phoenix Center. A place born from loss, now breathing hope. Later that night, Maya walked the empty halls one last time before locking up. The photos on the walls glimmered faintly in the dim light, faces of those who had come and healed, even just a little. She stopped at one photo, a group of veterans smiling in the courtyard, sunlight on their faces. She touched the frame gently, her reflection faint in the glass. In the silence, she whispered, "You're still saving people, Eric, all of you are." The air felt warmer somehow, as if the past itself had finally exhaled. Outside, snow began to fall again, just like the day she'd left the base. The world was quiet, the streets empty, the night sky heavy with stars. Maya stood on the steps, pulling her coat tighter, and looked up. The snowflakes drifted through the light, glowing as they fell, thousands of tiny, fleeting sparks. She smiled. Once they had told her she was finished, washed up, broken. But she'd learned that even ashes can hold embers, and embers, when given air, become fire again. And maybe that was the secret all along. Sometimes the strongest soldiers aren't the ones who keep fighting, but the ones who learn when to heal. The first letter arrived without a return address. Just a plain envelope, stamped from an unfamiliar town in Texas. Maya found it in the morning mail, mixed in with supply invoices and volunteer forms. She turned it over in her hands for a long time before opening it, not out of fear, but out of instinct. In her old life, envelopes without names never brought good news. But when she unfolded the paper, her breath caught. The handwriting was neat but shaky. "You don't know me, but my husband served under Operation Black Phoenix. His name was Captain Aaron Hale. I only recently learned you were his commanding officer. I've read about your center. I think I need to see you." There was no accusation in the words, just pain, the kind that hadn't yet found a place to rest. Maya set the letter down carefully, her hands trembling. Hale. She remembered him, the steady voice on comms, the calm under fire, the one who refused to leave the extraction point without her, even when the order came to pull out. He never made it home. For years she had carried that memory like shrapnel. Now it was coming back to her in ink, in silence, in the voice of a woman she had never met. 3 days later, the woman arrived. Elena Hale, early 40s, auburn hair streaked with gray, eyes that looked like they hadn't rested in a decade. She wore no makeup, no rings, just a faded denim jacket and a folded flag pin on her collar. Maya met her at the door, her voice soft. "Mrs. Hale." Elena nodded. "You can call me Elena." They sat in the small counseling room, the one with the soft lighting and mismatched chairs. Between them, a cup of untouched tea grew cold. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Elena said, "I wasn't sure I should come, but when I saw what you built here, I thought maybe you'd understand." Maya folded her hands in her lap. "I'll try." Elena's gaze was distant. "I've spent years asking questions no one would answer. They told me Aaron died in an accident, but I know the difference between an accident and a cover story." Her voice trembled. "You were there, weren't you?" Maya hesitated. "Yes." "Then tell me," Elena whispered, "was it quick?" Maya's throat tightened. The truth pressed against her ribs like a blade. She wanted to say it was painless, that he never saw it coming, that it was over before fear had time to form. But she couldn't lie, not to her. "He knew," Maya said quietly. "He knew he wasn't going to make it, but he stayed anyway, because if he hadn't, I wouldn't be sitting here right now." Elena covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. "I tried to get to him," Maya said, her voice breaking for the first time in years. "I tried, but the blast," she stopped, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry." For a long moment, all that filled the room was the sound of quiet sobs. Then Elena reached across the table, her hand trembling, and placed it gently over Maya's. "You don't need to apologize," she said. "You brought him home, maybe not his body, but his story." Tears burned behind Maya's eyes. "He deserved better." "He deserved to be remembered," Elena said. "And you're doing that every day." Maya nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "That's all I've ever wanted." After Elena left, Maya sat alone in the quiet room, staring at the cold cup of tea. For the first time in years, she cried not from guilt, but from release. She realized something she'd been avoiding since the day she built the Phoenix Center. She wasn't just helping others heal, she was trying to earn her own forgiveness. But maybe forgiveness wasn't something you earned. Maybe it was something you built piece by piece, through compassion, through honesty, through acts that kept the fallen alive in memory. That night, she opened her journal and wrote one sentence across a blank page. "The only way to repay the dead is to protect the living." Months passed. The Phoenix Center was no longer a single building. 3 new facilities were being built, one in Virginia, another in San Diego, and one overseas in the UK, each modeled after Maya's blueprint, each carrying the same emblem, a rising phoenix surrounded by 8 small stars. One for every life lost on her mission. Every time she saw that emblem on a new wall, her chest ached, pride and grief bound together so tightly they felt indistinguishable. Ryan had taken a permanent position at the Washington office. His transparency initiative was gaining national traction. "We're getting somewhere," he told her during their calls. "They're rewriting the handbook on classified trauma protocols." Maya smiled faintly. "Told you they'd listen." He chuckled. "They're listening because you spoke first." But with recognition came attention, and attention brought pressure. A journalist showed up one afternoon, unannounced. He carried a camera, a notepad, and the eagerness of someone chasing a story. "Sergeant Wilson," he said, "I'm writing an exposé on Black operations and mental health. I'd like to feature you." Maya's expression didn't change. "No." "It could help your cause," he pressed. "People need to know what really happens out there." She looked at him calmly. "The people who need to know already do, and the ones who can't shouldn't." He frowned. "You're protecting the government that silenced you. I'm protecting the soldiers who can't defend themselves from politics." He didn't understand. Most never did. When he left, she stood by the window for a long while, watching the snow melt in the sun. The world always wanted heroes it could display. She wanted none of that. Heroes belonged to myths. She was just a woman trying to turn pain into something that could save others. The next week, Elena returned, this time, not as a grieving widow, but as a volunteer. "I want to help," she said. Maya smiled gently. "You sure?" Elena nodded. "I spent 10 years being angry at ghosts. I think it's time I started helping the living." They worked side by side for weeks, Elena handling outreach calls, coordinating families, organizing memorial events. Together, they built something sacred out of loss. One evening, as they locked up, Elena paused by the emblem on the front wall, the phoenix and the 8 stars. Do you ever wonder if they'd approve? She asked. Maya's gaze softened. They'd probably laugh at me for painting it wrong. Elena smiled faintly. Aaron used to say you never missed anything. I missed him, Maya said quietly. The two women stood there in silence, the kind that didn't hurt anymore. Spring turned to summer. The Phoenix Center hosted its first national symposium. Veterans, doctors, officers, and families gathered under one roof to talk about the wounds no one could see. Maya stood on stage, the emblem shining behind her, and spoke with the calm gravity of someone who had carried the truth long enough to know its weight. When we talk about service, she said, we celebrate strength, but real strength isn't about carrying the load. It's about knowing when it's too heavy and asking for help before it breaks you. Her voice trembled just slightly. We train soldiers to survive war. Maybe it's time we train them to survive peace too. When she finished, the room was silent for several seconds, the kind of silence that means people are thinking, feeling, remembering. Then came the applause, not thunderous but deep, reverent. Elena stood in the back, clapping through tears. Ryan nodded from the second row. And in that moment, Maya felt something shift, not in the world but within herself. For the first time in nearly a decade, she wasn't carrying the past alone. Later that night, she sat outside on the steps of the center. The stars stretched endlessly overhead. She looked up, tracing them with her eyes. 8 of them seemed to shine brighter than the rest. "Still watching me, aren't you?" she whispered. A soft wind passed over her face, warm and tender, as if in answer. She smiled. "I know I'm watching too." The next morning, a letter came from the Department of Defense. Inside was an official notice. Effective immediately, Sergeant Maya Wilson is awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for actions during Operation Black Phoenix. The citation remains classified. She stared at it for a long time, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. She didn't frame it. She didn't tell anyone. Because some honors weren't meant to be displayed. They were meant to remind. And she didn't need reminders anymore. She had purpose. She had peace. That weekend, she took the entire team to the mountains for a retreat. The place was quiet, pine trees, open sky, a small lake reflecting the clouds. They cooked over a campfire, laughed like they hadn't in years, told stories that had nothing to do with war. At one point, Ryan leaned back and said, "You ever realize we're the happiest broken people alive?" Maya laughed softly. "That's the point." Blake threw a pebble into the fire. "You think any of us will ever feel normal again?" "Normal's overrated," Maya said. "I'll take real any day." The group fell silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Maya added, "You know what I think? We're not supposed to go back. We're supposed to go forward, just differently." Ryan smiled. "Leave it to you to make trauma sound poetic." Maya looked into the fire, her reflection flickering in the light. "It's not poetry, it's survival." As the night deepened, the laughter faded into quiet reflection. One by one, the group drifted off toward their tents, leaving Maya alone by the fire. She stared at the flames, bright, alive, consuming and renewing all at once. And she realized that maybe the phoenix wasn't just a symbol. Maybe it was a promise that even when everything burns, something new can rise. Something better. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and whispered to the fire. "For them, always for them." The flames cracked softly in reply. And above her, the stars kept watch, silent witnesses to a woman who had once been called washed up, broken, forgotten, and who had quietly become the spark that helped countless others rise. The letter came sealed in red. Official, cold, final. Maya stared at it on her desk for a long time before opening it. She already knew what it would say, the tone, the phrasing, the bureaucratic precision that could flatten an entire life's work into a few sentences. Due to ongoing investigations into the handling of classified materials, the Phoenix Initiative and its affiliates are temporarily suspended pending review by the Office of National Security Oversight. Suspended. The word echoed in her head like a gunshot. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the wall. The emblem of the phoenix, the bird rising through its circle of 8 stars, seemed suddenly fragile, like it could crumble under the weight of the words on that page. For a moment she felt that old, familiar fear return, the one she thought she'd buried years ago, the fear of being erased again. 2 hours later, Ryan Torres arrived. He'd already heard. His expression was tight, controlled, but his eyes burned with frustration. "They're calling it a security review," he said. "They think someone been leaking mission data through the center's sessions." Maya frowned. "That's impossible. We don't record anything. We don't even ask for details." "Someone accused you of gathering classified intel off the record." She stared at him, disbelief hardening into calm. "Who?" He hesitated. "They won't say, but I have a guess." "Blake." Ryan nodded reluctantly. "He filed an internal report, claimed one of your clients referenced covert ops data in therapy sessions." Maya's chest tightened. "He knows better. I trained every counselor myself. We never crossed that line." "I know," Ryan said, "but they're not interested in the truth. They're interested in control. The Phoenix Center's gotten too visible, too influential, and the idea of classified veterans speaking freely, that scares them." Maya looked down at the letter again. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the paper, like a ghost. "They're trying to silence it before it becomes unstoppable." Ryan nodded. "And they picked the wrong woman to underestimate." By evening the building was nearly empty. Volunteers had gone home. The lights in the hallway flickered softly. Maya sat in her office, staring out the window at the falling rain. She wasn't angry, she was tired. She built this place to protect others from the same silence that had almost destroyed her. Now the silence was coming for it too. A soft knock broke her thoughts. It was Blake. He stood in the doorway, drenched from the rain, his expression a storm of guilt. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said quietly. Maya didn't turn. "You filed the report." "I had to," he said quickly. "They pressured me, said if I didn't cooperate, they'd shut down second chances." She finally looked at him, calm, unreadable. "So you gave them what they wanted." "I thought it would be routine. A review, not this." "Blake," she said softly, "the people who die in silence don't need reviews. They need places like this." His jaw tightened. "I know, and I'm going to fix it." "How?" "I'll testify. Tell them it was my mistake." Maya shook her head. "That won't stop the process. It's already in motion. They need a villain, not an explanation." He took a step forward. "Then let it be me." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man who had once mocked her, but the man who was finally willing to sacrifice something. "No," she said softly. "We've both carried enough blame for one lifetime." The next morning, the story hit the news. Military-funded mental health program under review for breach of confidentiality. The photo beneath the headline was of her, standing outside the Phoenix Center, looking into the distance. Someone had taken it without her knowing. Reporters gathered at the gates, cameras flashed, questions flew. "Sergeant Wilson, did you mishandle classified information? Is the Phoenix Center being used to leak black operations data? Are you planning to resign?" She said nothing, just walked past them with quiet grace, her eyes steady, her face unreadable. Inside, the staff watched the broadcast in stunned silence. Elena looked up from the TV, tears in her eyes. "They can't do this to you." "They already are," Maya said. "But it's not true." Maya gave a faint smile. "The truth doesn't always matter when fear is louder." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat in her office, the room dimly lit by the glow of her desk lamp. Papers covered the table, case files, letters, transcripts of testimonies from soldiers who had found hope here. She picked one up at random. It was from a Marine she'd counseled months earlier. "You told me healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking. I think I finally understand what you meant." She folded the letter gently, placed it aside, and whispered, "Then I can't break either." The next day she drove to Washington. No entourage, no press, just her old truck, a folder of documents, and the kind of resolve that doesn't announce itself. Ryan met her outside the oversight building. "You really think they'll listen?" he asked. "They'll listen," she said quietly, "because I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to remind them who they serve." Inside, the room was cold, all polished glass and steel. The same kind of room that had once tried to bury her career. She stood before the panel, her voice calm, her eyes steady. "You've accused my center of violating national security protocols. But what we violated was silence. The silence that's been killing our soldiers long after the shooting stops." A murmur rippled through the room. She continued, "You can shut me down if you want. You can take away the name, the building, the funding. But you can't erase what's already begun. You can't unteach empathy. You can't undo connection. You can't make people forget that they're not alone." One of the officials leaned forward. "Sergeant Wilson, the rules exist for a reason." "And so does pain," she replied. "We built this place because pain has been ignored for too long." Her voice softened. "When I was discharged, I thought silence was loyalty, but silence is just another form of death. The Phoenix Center wasn't built to expose secrets. It was built to save lives, and if that's a crime, then I'll take the sentence." The room went quiet. Even the pen stopped moving. Hours later, as she walked out of the building, Ryan caught up with her. "That was something else." She smiled faintly. "Let's hope it's enough." They stood on the steps, watching the city lights flicker through the fog. For the first time in weeks, Maya felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened next, she'd already won the fight that mattered. Days turned into weeks. The investigation dragged on, slow and political. But then, quietly, the tide began to turn. Anonymous testimonies poured in, hundreds of them. Soldiers, veterans, even officers who had been through the Phoenix Center. Each letter told a story. Each one ended with the same line: "She saved my life." When the review board reconvened, they didn't call her to testify. They didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any defense could. The final verdict arrived on a gray morning. The Phoenix Initiative is cleared of all allegations. Full operations reinstated. Commendation issued for exemplary service to classified veterans. Maya read it once, then set it down. She didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She just breathed. Because it wasn't vindication she'd been seeking. It was validation that what they'd built mattered. When she returned to the center, the staff was waiting. Elena hugged her first, crying openly. Ryan clapped her on the shoulder. Blake, who had nearly cost her everything, stood in the back silent, but his eyes said what his mouth couldn't. Maya looked around the room, her voice steady. "We don't celebrate survival," she said softly. "We honor it. Let's get back to work." And with that they did. That evening the rain stopped. The clouds broke. Light spilled through the windows, catching the emblem on the wall, the phoenix surrounded by its 8 stars, making it glow like fire. Maya stood beneath it, her reflection merging with the golden light. For years she'd been defined by others: soldier, failure, ghost, survivor. Now she was something else entirely. Not a title, not a myth, but a quiet force that refused to die. And somewhere deep down she knew the truth. You can silence a voice. You can bury a name. But you can't kill what rises again. That night as she left the center, she paused at the door. The wind carried the faintest scent of rain and pine, the same as Syria, the same as home. She whispered into the darkness, "We made it." Somewhere in the quiet of her heart, 8 voices answered. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a survivor. She felt like someone who had finally returned. The mountains were quiet again. Snow dusted the treetops, the lake below frozen smooth as glass. The world had gone still, the kind of stillness that makes you listen for things you can't see. Maya Wilson stood at the edge of the frozen water, her breath a soft mist in the cold. She wasn't in uniform, just a thick coat, gloves, and a knit cap pulled low over her ears. Her boots crunched softly on the ice-dusted ground. It had been a year since the investigation ended. A year since the world had tried to silence what she built. And yet the Phoenix Center was stronger than ever, not just one building now, but a network across the country. She turned whispers into something permanent, something no one could erase. But even in peace, she felt the ache of time, the distance between what was lost and what was found. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small metal emblem, the phoenix, rising through its circle of stars, the one she had once worn hidden beneath her fatigues. Now it gleamed faintly in the winter light. She turned it in her hands. "Still here," she murmured. Later that day, she drove back to town. The roads were lined with evergreens and melting snow. She passed by the old billboard, the one with the faded military recruitment ad. Someone had painted over it months ago with a single phrase in black letters. "Rise again." She smiled. She didn't know who wrote it, but she didn't need to. The words had become something larger than her, a quiet anthem whispered in barracks, hospitals, and rehab centers across the country. The phrase had started with her, but it belonged to everyone now. At the center, a small crowd had gathered. Veterans, families, new staff members, some she knew, others she didn't. Ryan was there, standing beside a large covered plaque. When he saw her, he grinned. "You're late." "I was talking to ghosts," she said lightly. "Tell them we said hi," he replied with a smile. The crowd laughed softly. The air was warm with camaraderie, the kind that only comes from shared pain and mutual respect. Ryan stepped forward, raising his voice just enough to carry. "We're here today to dedicate the Phoenix Center's national expansion and to honor the woman who made it possible." Maya took a small step back. "Ryan, don't." He held up a hand. "Don't worry, I'm not giving you a medal. I know how you feel about those." A ripple of laughter moved through the group. He pulled the cloth from the plaque. Beneath it, etched in steel, were the words, "The Phoenix Network, founded by Sergeant Maya Wilson, in memory of those who served in silence, and in honor of those who still rise." For a moment, Maya couldn't speak. The words blurred behind a sheen of tears she didn't try to hide. Ryan leaned close. "You okay?" She nodded slowly, just humbled. "Good," he said softly. "You've earned that." After the ceremony, she found herself alone in her office. The noise had faded. The laughter had drifted into the hallways. She sat by the window, the afternoon light casting golden lines across the floor. On her desk sat a stack of letters, all addressed simply to Sergeant Wilson. No ranks, no formalities, just gratitude. She picked one up. The handwriting was small and careful. "I was at the end of my rope when I found your center. You don't know me, but you saved me. Not by talking, but by listening. Thank you for giving me permission to live again." Maya smiled through quiet tears. She placed the letter down gently and whispered, "That's why we did it." That night she met Ryan and Elena on the roof of the building. The city below shimmered with lights. The air was cold, but the mood was warm, quiet music playing from someone's phone, laughter soft and easy. Elena leaned on the railing, looking out over the skyline. "You ever think about what comes next?" Maya smiled faintly. "Always." Ryan took a sip of coffee. "And what's next?" "I'm stepping down," she said simply. They both froze. Elena blinked. "You're what?" "I'm not leaving," Maya said, "but I'm stepping back. The work's bigger than me now. It needs new hands, new voices." Ryan frowned. You built this from nothing, you can't just— I can, she interrupted gently. Because if I don't, it'll always depend on me. And it shouldn't. This isn't about one soldier. It's about every soldier who still carries a war inside them. Elena's eyes softened. You really think you can let go? Maya looked out at the horizon, at the thousands of lights scattered across the darkness like distant stars. I think I already have. 2 weeks later, she left the city for the last time. No press, no farewell speech, just a quiet departure the way she'd lived. She left the Phoenix Network in capable hands, Ryan as director, Elena running outreach, a new team ready to continue the work. Before she left a note on her office desk. Don't chase recognition, chase purpose. The world remembers louder things, but healing whispers last longer. She moved to a small town near the foothills, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the sky felt close enough to touch. She rented a cabin near the woods, a modest space with creaking floors and a wide porch that overlooked the valley. She didn't decorate much, just photos of the team she'd lost, the people she'd helped, and one simple frame that read, "Rise again." Every morning, she brewed coffee and sat on the porch, watching the sun spill across the mountains. Sometimes she wrote letters. Sometimes she just listened to the wind move through the trees. Peace didn't feel foreign anymore. It felt earned. One afternoon, a car pulled up to the cabin. A young woman stepped out, early 20s, military haircut, posture that screamed discipline. "Sergeant Wilson," she asked nervously. Maya smiled, just Maya. The young woman held out a folder. "I'm with the new Phoenix program. We're expanding internationally. I was told to deliver this personally." Maya opened the folder. Inside was a photo, a group of veterans standing beneath a new sign, the Phoenix Center, Cobble Branch. Below it, a short message. "We built this where it all began." Maya traced the words with her finger, her eyes misting. "Thank you," she whispered. The young woman hesitated. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, how did you do it, all of it?" Maya thought for a moment, then said softly, "By not waiting for permission to care." The girl smiled, the kind of smile that carried both admiration and hope, then saluted her before returning to the car. Maya stood there long after the sound of the engine faded, holding the photo against her heart. That night the sky was clear. The stars shone bright and endless. She stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl, and looked up. For a long time she said nothing. Then softly she whispered the names one by one. Aaron, Eric, Cole, Vega, Ramirez, Thompson, Hayes, Lynn. 8 names, 8 lives, 8 stars. Each name was a heartbeat, a light, a reminder that sacrifice doesn't end when the shooting stops. When she finished, she closed her eyes and whispered, "We kept the promise." Years later, when people spoke of Sergeant Maya Wilson, they spoke softly, not with the excitement reserved for legends, but with the reverence given to those who lived truth quietly. Her name appeared in textbooks, her methods in policy reports, her philosophy in training programs worldwide. But to those who knew her, she wasn't an icon. She was the woman who listened, who stayed, who healed without needing to be seen. At her passing, a small group gathered at the mountain she loved. No formal service, just stories, laughter, silence. Ryan placed her emblem, the phoenix with its 8 stars, on the edge of the lake, where sunlight caught it like fire. "She never wanted statues," he said softly. "She just wanted the noise to stop hurting." Elena smiled through tears. It did. They stood there together, the wind soft around them, the reflection of the sky dancing across the water. And somewhere in memory, in legacy, in the quiet hearts of those she saved, Maya Wilson still lived. Not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as something rarer. A reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it simply acts. And in that silence, where words fail and wounds begin to heal, the phoenix rises again. Moral reflection, final voiceover beat. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't fight for spotlight or praise. It just keeps showing up quietly, persistently, until the world around it changes. Because real heroes aren't the ones who seek glory. They're the ones who keep others from falling apart in the dark.